It's time to let you in on a little secret. Actually, lots of secrets. We're talking strategy and, most importantly, return on your investment for your podcast. Welcome to Branded Podcast Secrets. All right, welcome to another episode of Branded Podcast Secrets. I'm your host, Ann Kroeker, here today with another very special guest. Today, I know I'm personally excited to talk to you, Ann, because as I mentioned right before this, I've got a book in my head. So very, very anxious, but I have Ann Kroeker here. Ann is the host of the Writing Coach podcast. Ann, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, with this podcast, I've just talked to people from all different backgrounds and how they're utilizing podcasts. Writer, it's my heart. I love writing. That's always been a heart piece for me. So let's talk a little bit about you're a writing coach. Can you talk a little bit about your background in writing and what brought you down this path to actually being a coach?
Yes, absolutely. I've been a writer since college and actually grew up in a really literary household of journalists, people who loved books. So I've just been surrounded by the printed word for my whole life. So whether or not that was my destiny, I don't know, but that is definitely the path that I took. And when I graduated from college, I began immediately to explore freelance writing from a corporate angle, freelance writing in terms of submitting to magazines. And that grew into becoming an author. And then eventually, so I've written 3 books, one is co-authored, but eventually I ended up on 2 different editorial teams of 2 fairly large organizations online. And there, with my mentor, she suggested that based on the way that I approach my editing, the way I interact with authors, she said, basically, you're coaching. So I think you should become a writing coach. And I'm like, well, what's a writing coach? So she said, go look it up. I think you're going to find that that's a good fit for who you are. And I left out one piece, which is that for a while, I was actually teaching high school students who were college bound. I was teaching composition and creative writing. So I also had this teaching experience, limited. It was in a more of a homeschool situation. So in other words, I'm not trained in that, but I was experienced in that. So I put all these things together, my personality, my experience as a writer, my experience as an editor, and this teaching. It all seemed like the perfect convergence of everything I had ever done and been to become a writing coach. So I hung up my digital shingle, if you will, and I had such a network at that point from my work as an editor that I automatically had a business growing. And so that's how it all started.
I love it. So here's the irony of you having a podcast is that many people create podcasts because they hate writing and they don't want to blog. And so you shouldn't be that way, right? Like, so I'm curious to know where you were in your building of your business, where you were like, you know what? I know we need more content, right? That's what everybody needs as a business owner, but where you decided to go in on the podcasting side of it.
That's a great question. You're right. There are people who are writers, who are speakers, and speakers who are writers. And so how did I get into that? Well, I did have some experience. I left out pieces of my life, obviously, skipping over decades of activity. And so I did have a little experience working with people who were presenters. And so I won't go into the details of that, but in other words, I was comfortable speaking. And I had always been intrigued by podcasting. So what happened was I started probably 2012, 2013 is when I started officially coaching people. But in 2014, I had some caregiving crises going on in my life where I was being pulled in a lot of directions. And so the blogging that I'd been doing was taking a different type of work and attention that I could not give it at that time. And I had thought about podcasting because of this part of me that feels comfortable interacting and speaking. So I'd been thinking about it, but this will be funny for you to hear, but there had been this first wave of early adopters to podcasting. And then that kind of died down. And then right around the time that I was thinking about it, it was on the rise, but like, who knows how far we had to go, And so I kind of felt like I was behind the whole game, which is so hilarious now because it's like no end in sight, right? No. It seems like podcasting is just exploding. But this is 2014. I thought I might be late to the game. Hilarious, because it actually turned out to be an amazing time to enter into the world of podcasting. But my mentality was, I need to, just as you said, I need to develop content. I need to be lean about it. I need a quicker way to reach into the lives of writers and help them and serve them and coach them. And so this seemed like a really natural thing to try. Of course, I was nervous. There weren't the same kinds of resources and training available that are readily at our fingertips now. So I had to figure out a lot of things on my own and do a lot of deep searches, just trying to solve problems and get answers to questions. But eventually I was able to launch. And so I started, made some mistakes, but I got started, and it was a leaner way to do it. I ended up kind of changing my approach a little bit early on, and it changed how I went about, creating any given episode. But yeah, that's how I started. Yes, exactly right. Needed to create content and needed to do it in a faster way, and just reach them in a new, fresh way. I was intrigued by
Yeah.
this avenue.
Can you dig into more of that? Because it's one thing I always love to ask is, okay, you go in with an idea of what you're going to do, with a strategy of how you're going to do it. So you said you went in and things had to change. Can you talk about the change that you made with it? Because of what
Yeah.
you discovered of mistakes or what was working better?
Yes. Yes, I'll talk about a technical mistake and then sort of a content driven,
Yeah.
not mistake, but just change,
Bettering,
shift.
bettering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay. So what happened technically is that I did not understand exactly how to host it and where to host it and what
Mm.
to call it. So I had initially I had a different name for what I was going to create. And what I didn't understand was how the feed was drawing the name. So I
Mm.
created artwork and everything, and it wasn't matching. I'm like, people can't find it. I can't find it anywhere. And what was happening is I had hosted it on my main website, which is annkroeker.com. And I had recently, because of becoming a writing coach, I just dropped all the other nomenclature that I had attached to myself. So I had used to have writer and editor, and I just dropped all that and put writing coach. So now my website was Ann Kroeker Writing Coach. And so I didn't know it, but the podcast was pulling that as the title. And so
Oh.
then met with my host. I'm hosted with Blueberry. I met with Mike. I said, Mike, help me figure out what to do. And he said, oh, I see what's happening. So you basically have two choices. You can start over. And I didn't have that many episodes really, but it felt like, when you're just getting started and you only have a few episodes, that feels like a big
It's a
deal.
lot. It's a lot.
Like to lose what little ground
Yeah.
you've gained. But anyway, you can start over, or you can just go with it. And Ann Kroeker Writing Coach, I mean, it's named after you. It's what you do. Why not just go with it? So my mistake became an incredible advantage because I chose not to start over. I chose to move forward at Mike's advice and move forward with Ann Kroeker Writing Coach, which had just happened technically. So that technical shift turned out to be a huge advantage because now
Wow.
my name was connected to the word writing coach, which was a SEO advantage,
Yeah.
especially because I had started fairly early, not only into podcasting, but also to the idea of a writing coach. That's fairly new in my industry in the publishing world and this role.
Yeah.
So that was an advantage. That was a mistake, but turned out to be an advantage. The other thing that shifted was I thought, oh, this will be great while I'm on the go and dealing with all these different crises and putting out fires everywhere. I can just have a microphone and some sort of recording device, and I can just like wing it. Well, my style, I'm not that great at winging it. I just didn't feel like what I was trying to achieve was going so well. And plus the attention required for the crises I was dealing with was taking a lot of my brain power and focus. And I just realized, you know what? I think I need to script this based on who I am as a writer. So I shifted from winging it very, very quickly. Like within just a few episodes, I decided I need to have some sort of at least a stronger outline, if not, a fleshed out outline. And eventually it became a script. But what's nice about that is instead of grabbing a transcript of my winging it, I was basically just getting a script, then that can become an article.
Yeah.
So again, it's an SEO advantage instead of having just show notes. And so I didn't know that I was getting these advantages when they were happening. It's only in retrospect that I started to realize, well, that turned out well, but
Yeah.
it did turn out well. It gave me content of different kinds so people could consume it in different ways. People can read it or listen.
Yeah. You know what? I think it's a huge mistake a lot of people make is the winging it, especially if they have a co-host or if they have, they're like, oh, we're just going to wing it. We're just going to wing it. And you really do have to have strategy behind it, at least an outline. Like when I finish this episode, what should I get from it versus just listening to you guys chit chat? You know what I mean? Or just listening.
Yes.
And I know for me, if I'm doing a solo show, especially, I tend to repeat myself too much versus, being in that specific. So I think I love that part so specifically. So how does this work? Do you see correlation? Do you measure correlation in how your podcast was the designed to find more customers for you? And do you see a correlation there, or do you measure that?
Okay, so I don't know that I would have had the terms at this time when I was
Yes.
doing what I was doing, but in retrospect, when I go back and see what I was doing, I was creating an asset, a
Mm-hmm.
giant business asset, and I was also, creating content, clarifying my ideas, which I think is a powerful thing about podcasting or writing,
Mm-hmm.
is that you're clarifying and articulating the things that you know to be true, the things you're learning, the things you want to share with the world. So, that was happening. But my goal was, as a coach, to coach as many people as possible. And this was one way to do that, to reach into more people's lives and be a coach in their ear, is how I kind of jokingly phrased it before. And a lot of people, caught on to that. Like, I love having you as a coach in my ear. And so I think there was that idea, is that I can help you. I'm willing to give this to you as my gift to you, is to give you ideas, encouragement, solutions, some skills. Like, we'll do some skill building. I kind of explored a lot of different things over the years.
Yeah.
And so I've been able to serve people more broadly. Now, what was happening, as I think, what you're hinting at or saying outright, is that I was able to reach more people who then became clients. So people are finding me through the podcast. It's validating me too. It's gotten me on stages. It's got me in summits. It's gotten me on other shows. So I think it does a lot of things all at once, so that somebody who's thinking about working with a coach, who can listen to her podcast and like
Yeah.
binge listen to past episodes, can see, is this somebody I want to learn from? Do I
Yeah.
like her personality? Would I want her speaking into my life? Well, you can try that out with the podcast. So, there's that. And then of course with speaking, they later, if you have video, they can see
Yeah.
you too. But if you have even just audio, they can tell, oh, this is a person whose energy, whose ideas, whose focus, I would like to have her on my stage or at my event. And so there was that as well. But I would say my primary drive was always the writer, always the writer. How can I help them feel more confident, get the skills they need and pursue the path that they're going toward, whether that's publishing or submitting to lit mags or whatever their goal may be. If I have the skills, I want to help them. And
Yeah.
this was a way to do that, with some of it for free. And then, of course, being an on ramp to my world in other ways.
I love it. So, we kind of joke, because I told you I would ask that question, and you were like, oh, I really, but you're over 200 episodes in, when it was just you didn't really have the strategy in place quite yet. Like, it kind of has come, is what I feel like. What was the motivation to keep going for you, when maybe right away you weren't seeing that? What was that? Was it just the service piece? Like, you knew you could reach people and help them in a different way? Was that it? Or was there something else too that kept you motivated to go all these episodes in? Because it's a huge accomplishment.
Thank you. And that's a great point. Like, what was behind it? Well, I think, I mean, to be honest, at its very simplest, I was having fun. It
Mm,
was fun for me. And
yeah.
I know it's not always fun for everybody who launches this venture, because there's so many moving parts in the beginning when you don't know what you're doing. Working with the microphone, later if you're doing your own editing, trying to learn the editing and what do I use to record, and solving problems
Mhm.
and researching. There's just a lot of things happening that aren't even the content. It's not
Yeah.
even what, like, all you want to do is get the content. But I had solved those problems fairly quickly, once I figured out
Yeah.
the Ann Kroeker writing coach thing, and I found a microphone that was fine for that time in my life. And so I solved a lot of those problems. And once I got that going and it kind of got my groove, it was fun. And so that's part of it. The
Yeah.
second part, I think, would be I have Blueberry provide stats, and I would go in. I try not to obsess about it, but I do like to look and see,
Right.
oh, why
Which you
didn't that
should.
one perform as well? Like, what's going on there? But when you see growth, it takes time. I definitely had it took a while to find. But then what happened was, I think because I was early to it, it was sort of in my world of writers and people pursuing publishing, there weren't that many voices in that space. So
Mm-hmm.
then I think what the big bump was, as I got a recommendation. Somebody recommended me who was a high profile name. So there was a big bump of interest.
Mm.
People were checking that out and listening to a couple of other episodes. And that happened. But like, golly, it would have probably taken, it could have been 2 or 3 months before I saw any real significant growth. But there was growth. And
Right.
that kind of keeps you going. You see a few more people, oh, there's some growth, but then whoosh, it went way up. And then I retained some of those people. Some were just curious,
Yeah.
onlookers, and others were people who were like, I like what I'm seeing. And so then of course, if you chart the growth, it just fits every, if you're producing value for people and you're getting better, probably you're going to retain a lot of people. And so I saw that growth that you see on most successful podcasts are going to find that. Yeah, that's motivating. It's motivating because
Yeah.
if you realize in my space, if you think about a writer who's trying to make a difference in somebody's life with their message or their ideas or
Hmm.
whatever, or a story if it's fiction. Uh, well, let's just talk about nonfiction for a minute. Most of these people would love to get in front of more people. Some
Hmm.
of them are a little, if they're starting out as a writer who's speaking versus a speaker who's writing, the writers tend to be a little bit more reticent,
Right. A hundred
but they would
percent.
still like to get it in front of their message in front of people. But like if you told them you're going to be in front of, let's just pick a number, you're going to be speaking to an audience of 500 people. And if they
Hmm.
haven't done much speaking, that can be really intimidating. But they kind of forget that if they're on a podcast and they get in front of 500, 500 listeners, downloads or whatever, that's pretty amazing. Like you
Yes.
just got in front of an audience bigger than what you would feel comfortable doing in person. So I think, that I don't know if that's what motivated me, but like when I ran it through my head that way, I realized the impact I was having. My numbers are different than that, but yeah, like it's exciting to think that, wow, that many people are showing up and saying, I'm in, I want to hear what you have to say. And that's really motivating. And that motivates you to want to keep serving, to keep showing up. And then of course, yeah, the other advantage is I can't, I won't say I directly can correlate that I have more clients. My business is growing more because of my podcast. Absolutely directly. I can't, because people, when I ask them, how'd you find me?
Yeah.
Sometimes the answer is not always podcast. So I can't
Right.
always make that direct connection. But I am convinced it is because it's so intricately intertwined with
Mhm.
everything that I'm doing.
Yeah. So did you have any idea that the high profile person that suggested you was even listening to you? Were you just like, whoa, where did,
It was somebody that I knew, and
okay.
so, but not super well, but I knew her, and so I wasn't surprised when I realized when I traced it,
Okay.
through Google Analytics, I could see the referrer, and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's neat. I didn't know where she had put
Yeah.
it, but then I found out later. I'm like, I traced it and I found it. Like, oh,
Okay.
that's neat.
That's
You
so
know,
cool. I think that's like to your point of if I were in a room of 500 people standing on a stage, I'd be happy with these numbers, right? And it's so cool when all of a sudden, sometimes, especially at the beginning, you kind of feel like you're talking out into a black hole, right? Like you're like, is anyone listening? And you see the numbers, but you're like, okay, or is that a bot? Like, is it really people behind there? And then when people start actually talking about it or saying something, it's just like it really is an incredible feeling when you get to that point, or somebody that even suggested it to others. It was that good.
yeah, I love it. I love it. And then, we share this on different avenues and you get more conversation there. And that's more of affirmation. Like I listened to the podcast, Anne, and I really loved X, Y, and Z that I took from that episode. Thank you. You're
Yeah.
getting more confirmation that people, oh yeah, here's a real person who really listened and really had a takeaway. So that's
Yeah.
an asset. And I'm just starting to think more. See, I didn't want to have ads because your listeners may not realize this, but most of the time, my episodes are solo monologues,
Mhm.
which was kind of novel at the time. When I started, really, I mean, unless I'm mistaken about my awareness at the time, I felt like I was inventing something. I felt
Right.
like everybody else was doing interviews. Everybody else is 40 to 45 minutes or even 50 minutes or more. That was the norm. So I felt like an outlier over here doing this monologue solo episode. I'm sure they were out there and I just didn't know that. But in all the I listened to a lot of shows
Yes.
and I didn't hear that many at that time. So I felt like, well, I'm going to do this thing and I know it's different, but this is all I can handle right now. And so I'm going to do what I can do. And
Hmm.
then, I also kind of framed it in my mind, also thinking about the listener. I thought, well, maybe this is an advantage. I don't want to steal writers. Writers have very little time to write usually. They're
Hmm.
usually running a full time, working full time or have other
Yeah.
obligations. And so I don't want to steal all their writing time listening to me yammer on. That's why I wanted to be really tight, with my
I love
ideas. I
that
didn't want to
strategy
repeat myself.
though.
And
Yeah.
so like, let's get in there, coach them, and then send them off to do the work. And so that was a way to kind of have a double strategy. Like, this is all I can do, but maybe it's better. And so I
Yeah.
did that for a lot of years. And I think I've lost the thread of why I brought that up. You asked me a question that kind of prompted me to go in that direction.
Well, it was just about, it wasn't even it was just about people noticing you all of a sudden, like being
Mm,
able to, like, hey, you helped me and you did this. And it's like, it's that piece where maybe you don't know they're listening quite yet, but then all of a sudden they do. And you were talking about
yes.
ads, and you were talking about you going
Oh,
into
yeah,
ads.
that's where
Yeah.
we were. Yes, it was the ads that kind of prompted this thought because I didn't want to, like, my entire podcast episodes were no more than 5 minutes sometimes.
Hmm.
And then I would listen to, a high profile name, and they're just their ads were over 5 minutes. I'm
Yes.
like, if that's what ads are,
I've
I
heard a
can't
few of
have
those.
them.
Yeah.
I can't do it. It won't make sense. People would spend more time. They would just skip over it and listen to the 5 minutes and be done. Right. So I'm like, I'm not going to do ads. I'm just not going to do it. I did Patreon for a while. I have these two or maybe three really faithful people who over the years have continued to support me through Patreon. But I haven't even promoted that all that much
Yeah.
because that was one way I thought, well, I could try it because that was becoming a
Yeah.
model back in the day, and I tried it. And I had, like I said, I had these wonderful people who have continued believe in it, believe in me, and believe in it, and this message. But anyway, I'm just now starting to see that, you know what, I can use this as an avenue to talk about other ways that they can work with me. So I have a program, I have a membership thing, so I can start talking about that. So I am doing, it used to kind of irritate me when I heard other people do it. And then I'm like, no, that's a way
Mm-mm.
they're showing me other ways I could connect with them if they wanted to. And I'm like, I'm going to do it. So I'm just barely starting that strategies after 200 plus episodes. I'm finally starting to think in a like better business strategy.
Yeah. Well, I think that's so important. Okay. So first of all, I love that you brought up that there were 5 minutes, because the one question we get asked all the time, every single time somebody sits down, how long should my podcast be? And I always say, I've heard podcasts that are 5 minutes that are 5 minutes too long. I've heard podcasts that are 2 hours that I'm so sad when they end. And I think knowing your client is so important. Like, you knew that, all right, they don't have time, but I'm going to get to the point. I'm going to help them out. And that, I think, is a huge strategy for you in that perspective. And I think it's really important to understand, I just had this conversation, is the next piece. So when you're really good at what you do, like you're helping people and you're making an impact, it is a natural thing for somebody to be like, wow, I really love what she's doing. What's next? Right? Like, and not everybody's gonna say that, but when people are offering great content, you're not offering it just so you can offer the what's next. Then the what next is comes naturally. And I think people who do that from a um, authentic perspective, it works perfectly, because it's not gross. It's not like, and we've all seen those people where they're up on the stage and they're giving you just enough information so they can turn it and sell to you, versus the people who are giving great information. I always joke, I'm like, my checkbook's written out, like I've got their name on it. You can tell how old I am that I'm pulling out a checkbook, but my checkbook's out and I'm writing, like, I'm just like, tell me how much it is. Like, that's all I care about. Just tell me what I owe you. And so I think it really is important for businesses to be able to do that. So I'm glad you're doing it. I'm very happy to hear you're doing it.
Thank you for your affirmation. Yes, I will continue forward with that. I think another thing that when we're talking about the ideal length,
Mm-hmm.
and this is true often of things we write as well. It needs to be as long as it needs to be, but you don't
Right.
always get that luxury if you're submitting to a publication that says you get this much, this many words
Right.
and no more. But in our podcasts, we get some freedom to be our own decision maker, our own publisher, if you will,
Yeah.
producer, I guess, in the world of podcasting. But I do think another little advantage that I got, and this is just, I'm not saying somebody should do a short podcast for this advantage,
Mm-hmm.
but this was an advantage that popped into my head just now, which is by keeping them short, I could do a lot more
Yes.
faster. And so the skill building happened fast. This is actually a writing principle too. If you work on shipping shorter things more frequently, your
Mm,
writing skills will have a chance to adapt and improve very rapidly. And
that's a
then
great
you
point.
can then use that and leverage all of that you're learning and to do longer pieces. And those will be better sooner because you did all the smaller work. I think that was an advantage. I did these shorter pieces, and I say they were sometimes 5 minutes. They did stretch out. I did one that when I was just starting out, I was really trying to keep them super tight like that. And then one of them, I had more to say, and it went 15 minutes. And people were like complaining because they'd gotten used to the shorter,
Oh,
not complaining,
funny.
but they
Yeah.
commented, I should say. They just observed that it was a lot longer than normal. 15
Observed.
minutes. Isn't
Yeah.
that hilarious? But then I introduced some interviews. So I do interviews as well now occasionally. So I mix it up. I wasn't
I
sure how
love
people
it.
would respond, but the very first set that I did, I recorded them. Probably this is like everybody who's a podcaster is going to go, no, tell me you didn't, but I did. I took my Yeti and I set it on a table, and I had, set it up with the right
Yeah.
settings so that it gets both sides, the dual side recording. And I recorded a few other authors who were at this writing conference, and that was my first foray into doing interviews. And I think in the end, like there was a lot of ambiance noise and
Mhm.
ambient noise and ambient noise,
Yeah.
ambient noise. Anyway, there was a lot
Ambiance.
of
Yeah.
little peripheral noise. Let's call it
Yeah.
that. Anyway, I felt a little bit like, an NPR show.
Yeah.
Here I am. Here we are in this setting. Anyway, that turned out to be a great way just to introduce them to my listeners, so
Hmm.
that they could get a taste of a different kind of voice in their lives speaking
Yeah.
about a certain topic, because they were very different writers. One was a novelist. He wrote some nonfiction as well. One was doing essay work, and then another is just this humor writer. So I had these three very different personalities that I could introduce. So that was a fun experiment. I was very nervous to do it because
Yeah.
I'd never really edited it, and it was so much longer. So, there was a lot to learn there. I introduced a whole new bag of worms to figure out, but I did
Yeah.
it.
I love it. It's evolving. And I think that's what's so important for people to know. You don't have to have it all figured out when you start, and you can try things and see what works and see what doesn't. So, Anne, thank you so much for taking this time today. I love what you're doing with it. I love what you do, first of all, but what you're doing with this podcast. So if somebody wanted to learn more about you or your podcast, where is the best place for them to go?
Hey, if you can spell my last name, then we're
We'll
gold.
have it
It's
on our show notes. So go
It's
ahead
Ann,
and
and
give
go to,
it. Yeah.
yeah, annkroeker.com /everything. If they go to that page,
Oh,
annkroeker.com
interesting.
/everything, it's got all the ways that you can work with me for free or for paid, which would include the
Oh,
podcast. So they can look for the podcast logo, which just says Ann Kroeker Writing Coach.
yeah.
And that's there, along with other opportunities for them to work with me one-on-one, or they can find out about the membership and the book proposal program and all the other little things I offer, big and small.
I love that. That's a really great idea. I didn't even think of that. So, all right. And of course, all of that will be over on our show notes page over at eringgreger.com. So, Anne, thank you so much. We'll link to your podcast and all that good stuff. So, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for joining me today.
What a treat. Thank you.
Absolutely.